Hello, I'm James Ezimoha. Welcome to Africa News. Let's see your headlines. Botswana launched Global Expo event to diversify investments amid global diamond decline. New U.S. trade tariffs deepen South Africa's job market crisis. Cameroonians head to the polls this Sunday in high-stakes presidential election. Thank you for joining us. In Botswana, government and business leaders gathered for the country's premier trade and investment event, the Global Expo Botswana. The showcase comes as the government seeks to reduce its reliance on diamonds, the nation's largest export.
The Global Expo Botswana comes at an opportune time for Botswana. It comes as the country is set on diversifying its economy as its diamond industry is struggling. Botswana's budget has been constrained this year due to a prolonged downturn in the global diamond market. Botswana is the world's leading producer of diamonds by value. The Botswana government says with exhibitors and delegates coming from the region and across the world, this expo is positioned as a landmark event to drive economic diversification, strengthen trade relations, and unlock opportunities for sustainable development.
Our vision as a country is clear: to become a high-income, digitally enabled, export-driven, people-centered and diversified nation. We strive for a Botswana where every citizen has equal opportunity, meaningful work, and the empowerment to lead a fulfilling life. This gathering seeks to unlock high-potential business opportunities, to connect credible investors with transformative projects, and forge partnerships that will drive sustainable growth for Botswana and the region.
President Boko further asserts that Botswana is working to diversify its economy by focusing on key sectors such as agriculture, renewable energy, copper mining, and tourism. Entrepreneurs such as Saju are already taking advantage of the government's diversification plans. Saju's company produces atmospheric water generators. The innovator is one of the exhibitors at this expo.
Basically, the concept is this. Air has water vapor in it. That's a measure of, the humidity is a measure of that. This machine sucks that air in, brings that humidity down to dew point, which is 0 degrees Celsius, and condenses the water from gas into liquid. Once the water is in liquid form, there's a reservoir in the machine. Depending on the size of the machine, the reservoir would be placed accordingly. The water in the reservoir is then pumped through a UV and a carbon filter and pushed into a tank, a storage tank of whatever size you choose in a location you choose. Once it's in the tank, we link it up to a water pump and integrate it to any potential existing infrastructure you have. The two critical components in the productivity of the machine are both the humidity and the temperature. The warmer and hotter, the hotter and wetter it is, the more water this machine will produce.
At this expo, entrepreneurs and innovators such as Saju are mingling with global investors and decision makers in a showcase that promises to turn their opportunities into creative growth.
We turn our focus to Egypt's crucial role in brokering the latest ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. By hosting the talks, Egypt is positioning itself at the center of a delicate negotiation, balancing regional diplomacy, humanitarian concerns, and international interests. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Abdallah Nassef, a political analyst, to discuss Egypt's role as a mediator. Thank you for joining us, Abdallah.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Now, how significant is Egypt's role as the host of the latest Israel-Hamas ceasefire talks?
Of course, that's a great question. Well, Egypt's hosting of the ceasefire talks in Sharm el Sheikh is deeply symbolic and both symbolic and strategic. Cairo has long positioned itself on the indispensable as the indispensable intermediary between Israel, Hamas, and the international community. Holding the meetings in Sharm el Sheikh signals a controlled, secure, and neutral setting away from the direct pressures of Gaza or Jerusalem, but also close enough for shuttle diplomacy. Egypt's geography and diplomatic history make it the only Arab state that can talk to everyone, basically the Israelis, the Americans, and the Palestinian factions, as well as the history of doing so. And after months of failed truces, Cairo's ability to convene both parties face to face marks a significant reset. And this round is about sequencing, linking hostage releases to verifiable pauses, and then to sustained humanitarian access. And I think that will be key. And for Egypt, success would reaffirm its role as the region's stabilizer, as well as remind Washington that no durable Gaza arrangement can bypass without Cairo mediation and Egyptian mediation.
Now, beyond mediation, as you just mentioned, what specific tools of influence or channels of pressure does Egypt rely on to keep both parties engaged in talks, and how sustainable are these mechanisms in the long run?
Of course, well, I think that is the current challenge, but zooming out of it, Egypt's leverage comes from three interlocking tools. So, first, the geography. It controls the Rafah and the Kerem Shalom or the Karam Abu Salim crossings, the main arteries basically for aid and trade into Gaza. And second, security relationships. Egypt's intelligence services have decades long channels with both Hamas and Israel, allowing Cairo to translate these messages others cannot and relay them. And thirdly, international legitimacy. It is seen as a US ally, yet trusted enough by the Palestinians to host them. And the sustainability question is key. Egypt's influence lasts only if it can manage the border effectively, keeping aid moving in, preventing militant spillover, and maintaining calm in the Sinai. It is a delicate balance, but Cairo's institutional experience and the sheer necessity of its role give it enduring leverage. And mediation in this conversation is Egypt's currency. As long as the conflict persists, that currency holds value, but time will always be the best teller in this exact scenario.
Now, how effective is Egypt in ensuring the humanitarian components of the ceasefire, for example, aid delivery, safe passage, and civilian protection?
Of course, while on humanitarian grounds, Egypt is both a facilitator and a bottleneck. It has coordinated the entry of hundreds of aid trucks, medical evacuations, and fuel deliveries. But the flow has been far below what Gaza needs, and that should be changing now that the deal has been signed. And Cairo's challenge lies in working with Israeli inspection protocols while facing domestic and Arabic pressure to basically do more. That is the litmus. And the creation of joint logistics cells, the Egyptians, the US, and the UN, is improving throughout. So hopefully that could carry on and continue developing further. And Egypt also plays a quiet role in vetting aid convoys to ensure that they aren't exploited militarily. And it is a constant trade off between the speed and control, but Egypt's credibility on humanitarian issues has grown precisely because it's seen as pragmatic rather than rhetorical. And statistically, Egypt, as far as I know, has been the most contributor to aid since the war started, sending in the most aid out of all. And the more predictable the aid flow through Sharm and Rafah border becomes, the more Egypt consolidates its image as the region's humanitarian lifeline.
Now, what are the biggest risks to the ceasefire, both on the ground and diplomatically, and how can Cairo mitigate them?
Well, the biggest risk on the ground is fragmentation, basically. Local actors or factions will feel left out and might sabotage calm through rogue attacks. Diplomatically, the danger lies in sequencing disputes. Who releases first, who verifies compliance, and what happens on one side when one side deploys. Egypt mitigates through this constant verification loops with the US and Qatar, offering small, staged wins rather than ground brittle deals. And Cairo also uses its security coordination with Israel to contain flare ups swiftly. And this has been also historical. Egypt has always been the major and final coordinator of such ceasefires in previous example. And so the main the main hurdle in this scenario is whether the Israelis and Hamas will be able to keep their ends of the bargain. Basically, that should determine, and we are yet to see how the ceasefire that has been signed and the deal itself, how it unfolds, especially that it consists of many phases, the first of which is already in effect with the hostages set to be released on Monday or Sunday. It is still yet to be determined, but it should be earlier next week. And then we move on to the second phase of the deal, and that is yet to be made completely public, the details of which.
Now, how do you interpret the emerging cooperation between Egypt, Qatar, and the United States in mediating this crisis? Could it represent a more collective, multipolar approach to regional diplomacy?
Well, of course, this emerging triangle is the most functional diplomatic coalition in the region today. This argument could be made. Each brings something indispensable. You have the Egypt provides geography and intelligence links, as well as diplomatic history of negotiation and credit on with all parties. Qatar holds leverage with Hamas and the US, and the US offers guarantees and resources. And the coordination among them reflects a shift away from unilateral mediation towards a multipolar diplomatic ecosystem where different states manage distinct loans of influence. For Cairo, this arrangement dilutes regional rivalries and gives its diplomacy renewed legitimacy. And the more these actors institutionalize coordination through shared verification mechanisms and aid oversight, the more durable this collective role becomes. It is pragmatic multilateralism in action, driven by necessity rather than ideology, and putting the lives of Gazans above all else. I mean, if you look at the numbers, the extreme high number of amputee children, the number of innocent civilians killed in the crossfire, that constitutes the bulk of the victims of this war on the Gaza Strip.
Now, does Egypt's current diplomatic role hint at a broader shift, positioning African states as credible peacemakers in conflicts traditionally managed by Western or regional powers?
Of course, but also this did not start in this war. Egypt has mediated in almost every single war between Gaza and Israel since 2006. And Egypt's leadership in these talks suggests an expanding African diplomatic footprint as well. And as a leading AU African Union member and the Arab heavyweight, Cairo is demonstrating that African states can mediate complex security crises beyond the continent. It also underscores a quiet realignment. Western powers now rely more on regional brokers to manage conflicts. If Egypt can deliver even a partial success here, stabilizing Gaza and containing spillover, it sets a precedent for African-led peacemaking from Sudan to the Sahel. It's part of Cairo's long game to brand itself as a continental as well as a regional power, able to navigate Arab, African, and Mediterranean identities simultaneously. And one can only hope that this also expands into Africa, where there's many a conflict, as you all know, and hopefully the future should be brighter.
Abdallah, thank you very much for sharing your time and insights with us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
South Africa's unemployment crisis is deepening as sluggish economic growth, rising energy costs, and new trade tariffs weigh heavily on the economy. Experts warn the situation could worsen as job creation fails to keep up with population growth.
Over 600,000 South Africans enter the workforce every year, and the country's economy is not growing fast enough to absorb them into the labor market. Whilst economic growth has averaged an annual rate of below 1% for the past decade, the population growth rate has been about 1.5% per annum. This means more people are getting poorer year on year on a per capita basis, a measure of earnings per person calculated as a ratio to GDP, a reflection of the country's economic crisis.
For the last 10 years, we've averaged a growth rate of 0.7%. This year, we're hoping for growth of about 1%. The problem with that sort of level of growth is that the population grows faster than that, and so we're not able to accommodate the population into the labor force.
The country has worked to stabilize power supply after years of blackouts, but while the lights are back on, the costs are crippling, cutting deep into company profits. Among those feeling the heat, mining giant Glencore, steelmaker ArcelorMittal, and automaker Ford.
The cost of energy is upwards of 40% of their production costs. So this job shedding, these high electricity tariffs have a direct impact on jobs. Not too long ago, there was a meeting between owners of companies in the ferrochrome industry, companies like Glencore, Samanco, met with the electricity minister to discuss a reduced tariff.
With a ballooning debt burden currently at 77% to GDP ratio, there's little fiscal room to move. Plans are underway to revive growth through private sector involvement, but unions say the time is running out.
Go back to basics, strengthen the SOE so that it is well run, that you root out corruption, and it is able to provide the country with cheap energy for domestic use and for industry. And you'll be able to solve many of these problems. You'll be able to boost manufacturing, which is potentially a sector which can absorb millions of jobs, and you'll be able to grow the economy.
Analysts warn that without decisive action, South Africa risks deindustrializing, marking a direct blow to its ambitions of leading Africa's manufacturing drive.
We need policy in place, and we need some of the key infrastructure developed, particularly the road infrastructure, rail, ports, electricity. Mining companies, big manufacturers have been reluctant to invest and expand because if they do that, they don't have the network to support them. They don't have the rail system, the port system. So they've been holding back on investment and therefore holding back on employment.
Now, trade tensions with the United States threatens to make things worse and could push even more South Africans out of work.
Cameroon heads to the polls on Sunday in a presidential election that could extend President Paul Biya's decades-long rule. At 92, Biya is already one of the world's oldest leaders and could remain in power until nearly 100 if he wins.
A win in Cameroon's presidential election on Sunday could keep incumbent Paul Biya in office until he is nearly 100, but he is seeking to overcome frustration with his decades-long rule and a spirited challenge from a former government mouthpiece. Biya won power in 1982 and has comfortably held office since, doing away with the presidential term limit in 2008. His government has denied claims of ballot stuffing and manipulating the courts to sideline opponents. 92-year-old Biya rarely appears in public, with consistent speculation he is in poor health. The government last year banned public discussion of the topic. Maurice Kamto, Biya's top challenger in 2018, has been disqualified this election. The remaining contenders have failed to rally around a unity candidate, boosting the president's victory chances. Issa Chiruma Bakary, a former employment minister who announced he was defecting, is the challenger drawing the biggest crowds. He has accused Biya of mismanaging Cameroon's resource wealth, leaving it dependent on international financial institutions. Biya has acknowledged complaints about basic services like roads and electricity in the cocoa and oil-producing country. Voters have noticed a deterioration.
Since 2018, in the past 7 years, what has changed are the roads, which have become even more isolated. The city isn't progressing. To reach the west, it takes 7, 8, even 10 hours to get there. For me, things have only gotten worse. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
Roads, we need good hospitals, we need portable water supplies. There are a lot of things that we need in our country. There is so much changes that we need right now, a lot.
Analysts believe Chiruma might perform well in cities, but would struggle in rural areas where the ruling party has a strong turnout. This catfish farmer is hopeful for a fair election.
So I'm really hoping that we get to see a change where these institutions stand individually without influence to give room for democracy, hopefully, or an idea, at least we can have an idea of what democracy looks like in this country.
12 candidates are running in the election, and Cameroon does not hold runoffs, meaning the top voter getter on Sunday wins.
In Mali's capital, Bamako, long queues of motorists have formed at gas stations after a militant-imposed fuel blockade disrupted supplies for weeks. The government says new shipments from Ivory Coast are helping, but shortages continue to affect residents.
Outside gas stations in Mali's capital Bamako on Wednesday after Al-Qaeda-linked militants imposed a blockade on fuel imports. Many stations have been closed for several days or have only been able to supply diesel. The long queues on Wednesday came after the government announced a convoy of fuel tankers had arrived from Ivory Coast, allowing many gas stations to reopen. However, this motorcyclist said he'd been pushing his bike across the city looking for fuel and found nothing.
If the government can find a solution to this problem, we would be very grateful.
Mali has faced instability since 2012, when militants hijacked a Tuareg rebellion in the north. The current military government seized power through coups in 2020 and 2021, promising to improve security, which continues to deteriorate. The JNIM militant group declared the fuel blockade in early September. Less than 2 weeks later, insurgents attacked a convoy of over 100 vehicles under military escort, destroying at least 40 fuel tankers. Analysts say the militant pressure tactic aims to cut off landlocked Mali's economic oxygen.
Well, that's all we have today on Africa News. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.